Good evening. I'm grateful that everybody was able to make it tonight, that the invitation went out. And I know most of you are probably forced to be here because you're family, but I still appreciate you listening to this lecture. The reason I've decided to lecture tonight is on the reason that the United States of America is the greatest nation on the face of the earth. It does the most good, and because of that, the citizens in this nation have the largest freedoms and the greatest amount of liberty of any nation in the history of the world. The reason for that is what we celebrate here. To my left is the first page of the United States Constitution. The United States Constitution is 224 years old. It is a document that has blessed and preserved us as a nation and kept our citizens and our own lives free from the tyranny of oppressive government. Although many people claim to have freedoms, you hear it all the time. You hear people say, well, I'm free. This is America. It's a free country. You hear it all the time. Few people on either side of the political aisle, whether they consider themselves Republicans or Democrats or right or left-leaning, really understand what the U.S. Constitution is all about. In this lecture, I'll present a short history of the Constitution, and I'll define some other forms of government that have come to be since the Constitution was formed. And I will outline the present necessity to continue to uphold and protect the Constitution as the fragile document that it is. We all know that on July 4th, 1776 is a very important date in the United States. It was the date that was chosen to be placed on the Declaration of Independence, and it was the date that we declared ourselves a separate nation from our English, or the form of English government that was there at the time. The Continental Congress of the United States formed what was called the Articles of Confederation. And what the Articles of Confederation did was it loosely bound the 13 colonies so that they could operate and prosecute this war for independence, which they did successfully, of course. And on September 13th of 1783, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, the United States of America was a free and sovereign nation. So they continued to operate under the Articles of Confederation, but they realized that they were so weak that they really could not continue under that form of government. So on May 14th, 1787, the Continental Congress met, and they decided at first that they wanted to strengthen the Articles of Confederation, but instead of doing that, they realized very quickly that what they needed was something new. And after a lot of compromise and a lot of different politicians and different people that we call our founding fathers put forth different ideas of how they thought government should run. And after a lot of compromise, what came out was the United States Constitution. It was formally ratified by all of the states in 1789, which all of the states that voted to accept it became the United States of America. And in the 224 years since then, we've grown to 50 states from the original 13 colonies, as well as several protectorates, and like Puerto Rico, and we also have some other islands and things that fall under our Constitution. Now, since then, this was a brand new concept. A constitutional republic was a brand new concept, and it was something that had never existed in the history of the world. And it became, the U.S. Constitution became the father of many, many other constitutions. Countries that, for example, Mexico has a constitution. It was modeled after the U.S. Constitution. All of this because of the example of freedom and liberty that it gave. Now, not all of these governments, of course, grant the freedoms and liberties that the Constitution grants. During that time, the last 224 years, other forms of government have been put forth as being the grand utopia. Communism, which is the product of Karl Marx's thinking, in the Communist Manifesto, what it says is that by compulsory means that a few will rise up, throw off the shackles of whatever government that they're under the influence of at that time, and prepare the people for a grand utopia where eventually the people don't really need a government, that they rule themselves and that they live in this grand utopia. Well, we understand, those of us that lived through the Soviet Union and are still aware of what's going on in communist China and other countries, are aware that millions of those that did not fit the communist utopia or the way that they were, that they're thinking, those millions of people are now buried because communism simply does not work. Socialism, whether right or left, many people forget that Nazi Germany, that was actually a socialist government. Supposes that government should own and operate the entities that produce economic opportunity, such as businesses, factories, any place of business, schools, and that the government is the one that should control all of those. Each of the citizens of those countries are forced to rely on the government for all of the means that they need in order to continue living. We also understand one of the things that Margaret Thatcher said about socialism, having recently passed. Those of us who remember Margaret Thatcher, one of her most famous quotes was, "Sooner or later, socialists run out of other people's money." Today, as in from the very first day that the Constitution was ratified and adopted, it's still under threat from every other ism around. It has outlived many of those isms. And we understand that politicians on both sides of the aisle continue to threaten our rights and liberties for the good of the people. Recently, we have an example going on right now. There's a huge debate about gun control. We talk about compromise from both sides of the aisle. Well, what that compromise means is that they're attempting to pass a law. And whether for the good or the bad, again, when a law is passed, some rights and privileges are infringed upon. So who is threatening the Constitution today? Because many will say it's not being threatened at all. Well, it's not true. Lobbyists and special interest groups buy influence. Judges with agendas legislate from the bench. There are many other threats today to the Constitution. The biggest one is the lackadaisical attitude of most voters. They don't care to understand what the issues are, and so they simply do what feels good. And sometimes those things backfire. So what is our duty? What is our duty as we seek to uphold the Constitution? Too many people will say, "I'm just one person, what am I supposed to do?" Well, Ezra Taft Benson, who was the Secretary of Agriculture under President Eisenhower, said that no greater responsibility rests upon all citizens of this republic and of neighboring republics than to protect the freedoms vouchsafed by the Constitution of the United States. So he said it's not only a citizen's responsibility to protect those freedoms and to look out for those freedoms, but also all of those who are protected by those freedoms vouchsafed in the Constitution. So what do we do as one person? Do we seek out and look for politicians and uphold those politicians who promise to uphold the Constitution, to uphold our freedoms and liberties? Or do we simply buy into their slogans? Many times we hear a great slogan and we think, wow, that guy's got it, that sounds good, I'm going to vote for that person. But a little bit of research will uncover wolves in sheep's clothing. Do we know and understand the Constitution? How do we understand that it's under attack? And last but most importantly, do we cherish and value our freedoms and the liberties that the Constitution protects? Patrick Henry said, "It is natural to man to indulge in the illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against the painful truth and listen to the song of that siren till she transforms us into beasts. Is it the part of wise men engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty? Are we disposed to be those numbers of those who, having eyes, see not, and having ears, hear not, the things which are so nearly concern their temporal salvation? For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst and to provide for it." Millions of people in the United States today, and millions of people outside of the United States today, still look at the United States as that shining city on a hill. They want our freedoms. They want the same lives that we have that are guaranteed because of the U.S. Constitution. But it seems today that many people, whether they simply do not understand what grants them those rights and privileges, or for whatever reason simply seem to despise those freedoms and look for ways to not only have them taken away from themselves, but also from others. Only vigilance and active participation will keep those isms from destroying our liberty. We can't experiment with isms. We cannot experiment with other forms of government. We've seen their failure. Like I said before, those of us who lived through the fall of the Soviet Union saw what was going on. There are millions of bodies today buried in the former Soviet Union, in what is China, other places, Cuba, all of these places that where communism took root, Cambodia. One has heard of the killing fields that Pol Pot turned a beautiful country like Cambodia and completely gutted the cities, and there are bodies today that bear testament to his failure. Socialism creates tremendous debt by taking the money that other people earn and turning it straight to the government. The problem with these isms is that they don't actually care about the people that they're supposedly serving. It turns always into tyranny. Those that are in power have. Those that are not, do not. We must follow Patrick Henry when he said, "There is no longer any room for hope. If we wish to be free, if we wish to preserve inviolate those inestimable privileges for which we have been so long contending, if we need not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we have been so long engaged, and which we have pledged ourselves never to abandon until the glorious object of our contest shall be obtained, we must fight." I agree. We must fight. Now, when I speak of fighting, obviously I'm not talking about armed conflict, but we must fight. We must fight in the arena of the ballot box and in the arena of ideas. This is not a right or a left wing or a Republican or a Democrat issue. It is a freedom issue. It's an issue of liberty. And if we fail to fight, then we will see our freedoms and liberties go away. Because we know that when a government begins to take power, it rarely releases that power back. Patrick Henry again spelled it out clearly. Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our backs and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemy shall have bound us hand and foot? Sir, we are not weak if we make proper use of those means which the God of nature hath placed in our power. The millions of people armed in the holy cause of liberty and in such a country as that we possess are invincible by any force which our enemy can send against us, and I agree with that. He finished his speech with words that are again attributed to him at the end of the speech, saying, "Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I do not know what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." The Constitution guarantees those rights and liberties. It is under attack, and it must be defended. We have a responsibility to cherish our freedoms and liberties and uphold the Constitution through active participation. Do we have a question to ourselves when we look in the mirror? The question should always be, when we think about politicians, when we think about laws, when we think about the way that we live, do I cherish my freedoms and liberties the way that those who fought and bled to make this country free cherish those rights and liberties? Failure to act will result in the loss of those freedoms. God continue to bless us with the will to fight the preservation of our rights and liberties. God bless the United States of America and the Constitution that protects it. Thank you.